The summons, the great hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a massive cathedral made of crystal and starlight. Ambassador Thekvar stood at the center podium, his tall purple form casting shadows across the polished floor. Around him, representatives from 47 different worlds sat in their assigned seats, each one designed for their unique biology. The Zenthari ambassador's voice echoed through the chamber as he read from the golden tablet in his four-fingered hands. The charges against the species known as humans are as follows: unauthorized expansion into the Kepler sector, violation of the Neutral Zone Agreement of 2387, and military buildup in contested space. Council member Zixthala of the Vorthak Collective chimed softly from her crystalline form. The sound translated through the universal communicators as agreement. Next to her, the Depth-High representative's tank glowed blue in support. Even the mechanical mechanarch units clicked their approval with precise metallic sounds. These violations were serious but not unusual. Young species often pushed boundaries as they grew into the galactic community. The Council had dealt with such issues thousands of times before. There would be negotiations, some territory would be returned, perhaps a small fine would be paid, and peace would continue. Thekvar continued reading. The human government has been given standard notice to appear before this council within 30 galactic standard days to discuss resolution of these matters. As is traditional, they may bring their finest diplomats and negotiation teams. The ambassador set down the tablet and looked around the chamber. The humans have been contacted through all proper channels. Their response is expected shortly. But days passed with no word from Earth. At first, no one was concerned. Humans were still new to galactic politics. They had only made contact with the Council 15 years ago, after all. Perhaps they needed time to understand the proper procedures. Maybe they were selecting their best negotiators or preparing their arguments. The Council waited patiently. They had waited centuries for some species to respond before. A week went by, then another. Council Secretary Morden, a small green creature with large eyes, approached Thekvar during a break between sessions. Ambassador, still no response from the humans. Should we send another message? Thekvar's purple skin shifted to a darker shade, showing mild concern. Yes, send the message again. Perhaps it was lost in transmission. These things happen with newer communication systems. The second message was sent with high-priority coding. It reached Earth's government within hours. The Council waited for a reply. Nothing came back. By the third week, whispers filled the Great Hall. Representatives spoke in hushed tones during meal breaks and private meetings. The Vorthak delegates chimed nervously among themselves. The Depth-High's tank water seemed more agitated than usual, swirling with unusual currents. This is most irregular, said High Counselor Vexara, the Council's eldest member. Her ancient voice carried the weight of 3,000 years of galactic diplomacy. In all my time, no species has simply ignored a formal summons. Ambassador Thekvar stood before the full council during the next session. Fellow representatives, we face an unusual situation. The humans have not responded to any of our communications. They have not acknowledged our summons, requested additional time, or sent word of their intentions. The hall buzzed with concerned sounds from dozens of different species. Clicks, chimes, bubbles, and electronic beeps filled the air as representatives discussed this strange development with their aides. Perhaps they do not understand our authority, suggested Delegate Cretan of the Spiral Arm Coalition. His slug-like body glistened under the chamber lights as he spoke. They are a young species. They may not grasp the importance of council jurisdiction. Impossible, replied the Mechanarch Prime Unit. Its voice was flat and electronic. Our first contact protocols clearly explained council authority. Human leaders acknowledged this understanding in writing. Vexara raised one of her 6 arms for silence. Then we must consider other possibilities. Are the humans experiencing internal conflict? Civil war, perhaps? Such things can disrupt normal diplomatic functions. Secretary Morden consulted his data tablet. Our intelligence reports show no signs of internal conflict on Earth or its colonies. Their government appears stable and functional. Then why do they not respond? Asked the Depth-High representative, his words appearing as text on everyone's screens, since his species communicated through bioluminescent patterns. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Thekvar had seen many diplomatic crises during his long career. He had negotiated peace between the warrior Kethmorn and the peaceful Veltar. He had helped resolve the great trade dispute that had threatened to divide the entire galaxy into warring economic blocs. But he had never encountered simple silence before. "Ambassador," said Counselor Zindar of the Outer Rim territories, "what if they are preparing military action? Some species respond to pressure with aggression rather than negotiation." The chamber fell quiet. Military action against the Council was not unheard of, but it was rare and always ended badly for the aggressive species. The Councils combined, fleets were massive and experienced. No single world could stand against them. If they intended military action, they would likely make demands or threats first, Tekvar replied. Aggressive species typically announce their intentions. They want to intimidate before they attack. The humans have announced nothing. Another week passed. The silence from Earth continued. During this time, the Council's intelligence networks worked overtime. Spy satellites observed human worlds from a distance. Communication intercepts tried to catch any hints about human intentions. Diplomatic contacts on neutral worlds attempted to reach human traders and travelers for information. What they found was puzzling. Human activities appeared completely normal. Their colonies continued regular operations. Their trade ships maintained normal schedules. Their military forces conducted routine patrols and exercises. There were no signs of mobilization, no emergency meetings, no propaganda broadcasts preparing their population for war. It was as if the humans had simply decided the Galactic Council did not exist. "This behavior makes no sense," Tekvar confided to his personal aide during a private moment in his quarters. "Every species wants something: territory, resources, security, recognition. But the humans ask for nothing. They demand nothing. They threaten nothing. They simply ignore us." His aide, a young Xanthari named Kolveth, reviewed the reports on his portable screen. "Perhaps their silence is a negotiation tactic, Ambassador. Some primitive species believe that appearing uninterested gives them advantages in discussions." Tekvar considered this possibility. But what advantage could they hope to gain? They face the combined authority of 47 worlds. Their territory violations are clear and documented. They have no leverage for negotiations. The 30th day arrived. According to galactic law, the humans had until midnight Council standard time to respond to the summons. As the hours ticked away, the entire Council gathered in the Great Hall to witness what would happen next. Representatives filled every seat. News feeds from across the galaxy watched and waited. This was unprecedented in the Council's 3,000-year history. Midnight approached. Secretary Morden stood at his station, ready to officially record the humans' failure to respond. The great clock in the chamber showed minutes, then seconds remaining. The deadline passed. For the first time in 3 millennia, a species had completely ignored a formal summons from the Galactic Council. Not rejected it, not delayed it, not attempted to negotiate new terms. Simply ignored it entirely, as if the most powerful diplomatic body in the galaxy meant nothing. To them, the implications were staggering. If the humans could ignore the Council with no consequences, what would stop other species from doing the same? How could galactic order be maintained if any world could simply choose not to participate in the diplomatic process? As the representatives filed out of the chamber in stunned silence, Ambassador Tekvar remained at his podium, staring at the empty communication console where the human response should have been. In 3,000 years of galactic diplomacy, he had never encountered anything like this. The humans had not just rejected negotiation, they had rejected the very concept that the Council had any right to negotiate with them at all. And somehow, that silence was more frightening than any declaration of war could have been. The wait, the days after the deadline, felt strange in the Galactic Council chambers. Representatives walked the crystal corridors with uncertain steps, speaking in whispers about the human situation. Everyone knew that something important had changed, but no one could explain exactly what. Ambassador Tekvar found himself checking the communication console every few hours, hoping for some word from Earth. Even a refusal to negotiate would be better than this endless silence. At least a rejection would follow normal diplomatic patterns. This emptiness felt wrong in ways he could not describe. The Vorthok Collective's representative Zixthala approached him during the 4th day after the deadline. Her crystalline form chimed softly as she moved, creating musical notes that the translators converted into words. "Ambassador Tekvar, my people are concerned about this situation. We have trade agreements with 17 human colonies. Should we be worried about their stability?" Tekvar's purple skin shifted to show uncertainty. "I honestly do not know. Delegate Zixthala, This behavior is unlike anything in our historical records. She chimed again, this time with notes that expressed confusion. But surely they must respond eventually. No species can simply ignore the galactic community forever. One would think so, Tekvar replied. But the humans seem determined to prove us wrong. Across the chamber, the HFY representative floated in his specialized tank, his bioluminescent patterns flashing in rapid sequences. The translation screens showed his growing agitation. Unprecedented, illogical, concerning for galactic stability. The massive aquatic being had reason to worry. The HFY controlled 3 major shipping lanes that human vessels used regularly. If the humans were planning some kind of aggressive action, those shipping routes would be obvious targets. But intelligence reports continued to show normal human behavior. Their merchant ships still requested permission to use the shipping lanes. Their crews were polite and professional at space stations. Their diplomats at neutral worlds continued to attend social functions and cultural events as if nothing had happened. It was as if they lived in a universe where the Galactic Council's summons had never existed. High Counselor Vexara called for an emergency session during the second week after the deadline. Her ancient form moved slowly to the central podium, supported by mobility aids that had been crafted by the finest engineers in the galaxy. Fellow representatives, she began, her voice carrying the weight of millennia. We face a crisis unlike any in our recorded history. The humans have not simply rejected our authority, they have ignored it completely. This threatens the very foundation of galactic civilization. The chamber filled with sounds of agreement from dozens of species. The Mechanarch units clicked in perfect synchronization. The Spiral Arm Coalition delegates made low humming noises. Even the usually silent observer species transmitted brief electronic signals. The question before us, Vexara continued, is how we should respond to this unprecedented situation. Our options, as I see them, are threefold. She raised one of her 6 arms, extending a single finger. First, we can wait longer. Perhaps the humans simply need more time to understand the seriousness of their situation. A few representatives made sounds of support, but most remained quiet. After 2 weeks of waiting, this option felt weak. Second, she raised a second finger, we can send a diplomatic mission directly to Earth. Face-to-face contact might achieve what remote communications have not. More sounds of agreement greeted this suggestion. Ambassador Tekvar nodded his approval. Direct contact was often more effective than formal messages. Third, Vexara raised a third finger, and her voice grew heavier. We can begin economic sanctions, cut off trade agreements, restrict access to shipping lanes, and isolate human colonies until they agree to negotiate. The chamber grew quiet. Economic sanctions were serious business. They could harm innocent civilians and often led to increased tensions rather than resolution. Delegate Cretan of the Spiral Arm Coalition spoke up, his slug-like form glistening as he moved. High Counselor, what about military pressure? A show of force might remind the humans of our collective strength. Several representatives made sounds of disapproval. Military actions, even symbolic ones, had unpredictable consequences. Military options remain available, Vexara replied carefully. But the Council has always preferred diplomatic solutions. Let us not abandon our principles simply because we face an unusual situation. The debate continued for hours. Some representatives wanted immediate action. Others counseled patience. A few suggested trying to understand human psychology better before making any decisions. Ambassador Tekvar found himself studying reports about human culture during breaks between sessions. Their history was violent compared to most galactic species, but they had also shown remarkable capacity for cooperation when faced with common threats. Their first contact with the galaxy had been peaceful and enthusiastic. What had changed? During the third week after the deadline, the Council approved sending a diplomatic mission to Earth. Ambassador Tekvar volunteered to lead it, despite the personal risks involved. If the humans were planning military action, approaching their homeworld could be dangerous. The mission was scheduled to depart within 5 standard days. 3 ships would make the journey, 1 diplomatic vessel, 1 escort ship, and 1 communication relay to maintain contact with the Council. The approach would be careful and non-threatening, following all established protocols for diplomatic missions. But on the night before departure, something unexpected happened. Secretary Mordun burst into Tekvar's quarters with his portable communication device flashing urgent signals. Ambassador, we have received a transmission from human space. Thekvar's hearts both skipped beats. A response to our summons? No, sir. Something else entirely. They are broadcasting to all neutral worlds and independent colonies. The message is being repeated on every major communication frequency. What does it say? Morden activated his device and a human voice filled the room. The translation was clear and precise. This is General Sarah Chen, speaking for the Earth, government and all human colonies. We are aware that certain galactic organizations have made claims about our territory and actions. We do not recognize the authority of these organizations over human space or human affairs. We will defend our legitimate interests through whatever means prove necessary. Any attempt to interfere with human activities will be considered an act of aggression. That is all. The message was brief, calm, and absolutely stunning. Thekvar stared at the communication device. They did not even mention the Council by name. No, sir. They referred to us as certain galactic organizations, as if we were just one group among many with no special authority. The implications hit Thekvar like a physical blow. The humans were not just ignoring the Council's summons, they were publicly denying the Council's right to issue summons in the first place. Cancel the diplomatic mission, he said quietly. Sir? Cancel it immediately. If the humans do not recognize our authority, they will not receive our diplomats as neutral parties. They may treat us as hostile representatives of an organization they consider illegitimate. Morden's large eyes widened with understanding. They might arrest our diplomatic mission, or worse, if they truly do not recognize our authority, they have no reason to respect diplomatic immunity either. The news of the human broadcast spread through the council chambers like wildfire. Representatives who had been debating diplomatic options suddenly faced a much more serious problem. The humans had not just rejected negotiation, they had publicly rejected the entire concept of galactic authority. Within hours, other species began asking questions. If humans could simply declare themselves independent of galactic law, what prevented other worlds from doing the same? Several minor colonies sent messages asking for clarification about their own obligations to Council authority. The Mechanarch Prime Unit delivered a detailed analysis during an emergency session. The human broadcast creates cascading probability, failures in galactic stability equations. If 0.2% of member worlds follow the human example, Council authority becomes statistically meaningless. High Counselor Vexara looked older than her 3,000 years as she addressed the chamber. We stand at a crossroads, fellow representatives. We can either enforce our authority against the humans, or we can watch the foundations of galactic civilization crumble. But enforcing authority against a species that refused to acknowledge that authority was proving more complex than anyone had anticipated. The humans had not declared war, made demands, or even communicated directly with the Council. They had simply announced that they would handle their own affairs. For a galactic community built on the principle that all disputes could be resolved through negotiation, the human position was incomprehensible. How do you negotiate with someone who refuses to admit you have any right to negotiate? As the fourth week after the deadline began, Ambassador Thekvar realized that the Council faced a problem they had never imagined. What to do when a species simply opted out of the entire system of galactic diplomacy. The humans were not just rejecting negotiation, they were rejecting the idea that negotiation was necessary in the first place, the investigation. The Galactic Council's intelligence division had existed for over 2,000 years, but it had never been designed for a situation like this. Intelligence work typically involved gathering information about potential threats, monitoring trade disputes, or tracking criminals across space. It did not involve trying to understand why an entire species had decided to ignore the most powerful diplomatic body in the galaxy. Director Quental, a small insectoid being with multifaceted eyes, stood before the Council's Intelligence Committee, in a secure briefing room deep beneath the main chambers. Her 6 arms moved in complex patterns as she presented her findings. Fellow committee members, she began, her voice translated from rapid clicking sounds. Our investigation into human activities has revealed patterns that challenge our understanding of civilized behavior. Ambassador Thekvar leaned forward in his seat. As head of the Intelligence Committee, he needed to understand what the humans were really doing. Director, please share your findings. Quental activated a holographic display that filled the center of the room. 3-dimensional images of human space appeared, showing star systems, colonies, and shipping routes in detail. First, the obvious question. Are the humans preparing for war against the Council? She touched a control, and the display zoomed in on human military installations. Our long-range sensors detect increased activity at 17 major military facilities. New construction, expanded training programs, and higher production rates for military equipment. Committee member Vextol, a gas-based being contained in a specialized environmental suit, made a sound like rushing wind. This suggests they expect conflict. Perhaps, Quental replied. But look at the type of preparations. The display changed to show detailed scans of human military assets. They are not building invasion fleets or assault transports. They are constructing defensive platforms, improving planetary shields, and developing new point defense systems. Thekvar studied the images carefully. They are preparing to defend, not attack. Correct. But that is not the strangest part. Quental manipulated the controls again, and the display showed human civilian activities. Look at their colonies. Normal expansion continues. New settlements are being established. Trade with neutral worlds proceeds without interruption. Cultural exchanges continue with species that maintain diplomatic relations. The committee members made various sounds of confusion. This behavior made no sense from a military perspective. If they were preparing for a major conflict, Quental continued, we would expect to see resource rationing, civilian evacuation from border areas, and increased propaganda to prepare their population for war. Instead, human society appears to be functioning normally. Committee member Roldar, whose aquatic species required a specialized tank, sent his thoughts through bioluminescent patterns. Analysis. Humans behave as if Council does not exist. Precisely, Quental agreed. They are not preparing for war with us. They are preparing for the possibility that we might declare war on them. The distinction was subtle but important. A species preparing for aggressive war would focus on offensive capabilities and mobilization of resources. A species preparing for defensive war would focus on protection and maintaining normal life as much as possible. Thekvar felt his understanding shift. They do not see themselves as the aggressors in this situation. Correct. From their perspective, they are simply continuing their normal activities while preparing for the possibility that external forces might attack them for doing so. The holographic display changed again, showing intercepted human communications. Most were routine civilian and commercial messages, but some revealed interesting patterns. We have managed to intercept some government communications, Quental explained. The humans have been conducting detailed studies of Council military capabilities, logistics networks, and alliance structures. Spy work, commented Vextol. More than that. Look at these analysis reports. The display showed complex charts and mathematical models. They are not just gathering intelligence. They are running detailed simulations of potential conflicts. Thekvar studied the charts, his translator struggling to convert human mathematical concepts into his native language. What do these simulations show? That is the truly disturbing part, Quental said. According to our analysis of their analysis, the humans have calculated the probable outcomes of various scenarios involving Council military action against human territory. She highlighted specific sections of the intercepted reports. They have modeled economic blockades, limited military strikes, full-scale invasion, and diplomatic pressure campaigns. For each scenario, they have calculated probable costs, duration, and final outcomes. Committee member Korvash, a silicon-based life form, resonated with harmonic frequencies that translated as concern. Do their calculations show they can defeat Council forces? No, Quental replied. Their calculations show they cannot defeat us in conventional warfare. But they have reached a different conclusion. The room fell silent except for the humming of life support systems and the bubbling of Roldar's tank. They have concluded that the cost of fighting would be acceptable, Quental explained, even if they lose. This statement was so alien to Galactic thinking that several committee members requested clarification through their translators. Thekvar spoke first. You mean they are willing to fight a war they expect to lose? According to their internal communications, yes. They have calculated that surrendering to Council authority now would create what they call precedent for future submissions. They believe that accepting our jurisdiction over the Kepler sector would lead to continued expansion of Council control over human affairs. But that is how galactic diplomacy works, Vextol protested. Species join the galactic community by accepting certain limitations on their individual sovereignty. The humans appear to reject this premise entirely, Quental replied. They view each concession as encouragement for further demands. From their perspective, any submission to external authority, no matter how reasonable, creates a pattern that will eventually result in complete loss of independence. Roldar's patterns flashed rapidly. Psychological analysis requested. Human. Decision-making process appears irrational. That is where our investigation becomes truly concerning, Quental said. She manipulated the controls, and the display showed detailed psychological profiles of human leadership. We expected to find evidence of mental instability, cultural programming, or religious extremism that might explain their behavior. What we found instead was careful, logical analysis based on historical precedent. Historical precedent? Tekvar asked. Human history contains numerous examples of conflicts where technologically inferior forces successfully resisted superior opponents through extended defensive warfare. They have studied these historical cases extensively. The display showed human historical conflicts, small nations resisting large empires, colonial populations fighting for independence, city-states holding off massive armies through superior defensive positions and determination. The humans have concluded that defensive wars can be won by making the cost of victory unacceptable to the attacker, even when conventional victory is impossible for the defender. Committee member Yil Seth, energy being contained in a magnetic field generator, pulsed with electromagnetic patterns expressing disbelief. They plan to fight us until we decide the cost is too high? Exactly. Their strategy appears to be based on the assumption that the Council values peace and stability more than territorial control. They believe we will eventually withdraw rather than accept the casualties and economic costs of a prolonged conflict. Tekvar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. Are their calculations correct? Quental's multifaceted eyes reflected the holographic light as she considered the question. Our own military analysis suggests that enforcing council authority over human territory would require significant resources and time. Human defensive preparations indicate they could maintain resistance for years, possibly decades. But the principle matters, Vextal argued. We cannot allow species to simply opt out of galactic law. The humans appear to believe that some principles matter more than survival, Quental replied. This is the aspect of their psychology that our analysts find most difficult to understand. She changed the display one final time, showing the most recent intelligence reports. They continue to behave as if this conflict is already inevitable. They are not hoping to avoid war. They are preparing to fight it as effectively as possible, when it comes. The committee sat in stunned silence as they absorbed the implications. The humans were not trying to negotiate, intimidate, or find a face-saving compromise. They had simply decided that their independence was worth fighting for, calculated the costs, and concluded that those costs were acceptable. Director, Tekvar said finally, in your professional opinion, what are the humans going to do next? Quental's arms moved in patterns expressing uncertainty. Based on their historical behavior patterns and current preparations, they will continue normal activities while strengthening their defenses. They will not initiate hostilities, but they will not compromise on what they consider core principles. And if we take military action, the realization Ambassador Tekvar could not sleep. For 3 nights he had lain in his quarters staring at the artificial stars projected on his ceiling, trying to understand what the intelligence reports really meant. The numbers and analysis were clear, but their implications seemed impossible. On the 4th morning, he made a decision that would have shocked his younger self. Instead of attending the regular council session, he locked himself in his private office with every piece of data the intelligence division had gathered about human behavior, culture, and psychology. He was going to solve this puzzle once and for all. The first thing he studied was human history. Not the sanitized diplomatic version that had been prepared for first contact, but the complete record of their species' development. What he found was disturbing and enlightening in equal measure. Humans had fought wars continuously for their entire recorded history. Not just occasional conflicts, but constant overlapping struggles between different groups, nations, and ideologies. Their planet had rarely seen true peace for longer than a few decades at a time, but that was not what caught Tekvar's attention. Many species had violent histories. What made humans different was how they fought. Most galactic species viewed war as an extension of diplomacy, a way to gain advantage in negotiations or secure resources. Conflicts typically ended when one side achieved clear superiority, or when the costs became too high to justify continued fighting. Humans fought differently. They had records of conflicts that continued for decades or even centuries, long past the point where any rational analysis would suggest surrender. They had examples of small groups fighting massive empires with no hope of victory, simply because they refused to accept defeat. They do not fight to win, Tekvar said aloud to his empty office. They fight to avoid losing what they consider essential. The distinction seemed subtle, but as he studied more examples, its importance became clear. A species that fights to win will surrender when victory becomes impossible. A species that fights to avoid unacceptable losses will continue fighting until they are physically incapable of resistance. He opened the communication console and contacted Director Quental. Director, I need clarification on the human military preparations. Are they designed for short-term defense or long-term resistance? Her response came quickly. Long-term resistance, Ambassador. Their defensive installations are built to operate independently for years if necessary. They appear to be preparing for extended conflict rather than decisive battles. Thank you. Tekvar closed the connection and returned to his studies. The next piece of the puzzle came from human philosophy and ethics. Unlike most galactic species, humans had developed numerous competing systems of moral reasoning. Some emphasized practical outcomes, others focused on absolute principles, and still others prioritized collective good over individual survival. But running through all their ethical systems was a common thread: the belief that some values were more important than life itself. Most galactic species considered survival the highest priority. When survival was threatened, other considerations became secondary. This was logical, practical, and had enabled the development of diplomatic solutions to most conflicts. Humans had somehow developed the opposite prioritization. They would sacrifice survival to preserve what they considered essential principles. Tekvar began to understand why human behavior seemed incomprehensible to the Council. The entire galactic diplomatic system was based on the assumption that all species would prioritize survival above other considerations. When pushed far enough, any rational species would compromise to avoid destruction. The humans had rejected this fundamental assumption. He spent the rest of the day reviewing human responses to historical crises. The pattern was consistent. When faced with unacceptable demands, humans would choose conflict over compromise, even when compromise offered better survival odds. By evening, Tekvar had reached a conclusion that filled him with dread. The humans were not ignoring the Council's authority because they misunderstood it, or because they thought they could defeat Council forces. They were ignoring it because they had decided that accepting Council authority would compromise their independence in ways they found unacceptable. From their perspective, the specific territorial disputes were less important than the precedent that would be set by submitting to external judgment. They viewed the Council's summons not as an opportunity to resolve a minor conflict, but as the first step in a process that would eventually strip them of all meaningful autonomy. He activated his personal communication system and sent a priority message to High Counselor Vexara. Counselor, I need to brief the full Council immediately. I believe I understand the human position and the implications are grave. The emergency session convened within hours. As representatives filled the great chamber, Tekvar noticed the tension in the air. Everyone knew that the human situation was reaching a crisis point. Economic analysts had begun calculating the costs of military action. Defense coordinators were reviewing fleet deployment options. The machinery of war was beginning to turn. Tekvar stood at the central podium and looked out at the assembled representatives of 47 worlds. These beings had built the greatest peaceful civilization in galactic history. They had solved problems that had seemed impossible, negotiated agreements between species with incompatible biologies and philosophies, and maintained stability across thousands of star systems. But they had never encountered a species that considered independence more important than survival. Fellow representatives, he began, I believe I understand why the humans refused to negotiate, and I believe our response to their refusal will determine whether galactic civilization survives the next century. The chamber fell silent. Even the usual background sounds of life support systems and translation equipment seemed muted. The humans are not refusing to negotiate because they believe they can defeat us militarily. They are refusing because they believe that any negotiation with us is the first step toward complete loss of autonomy. Sounds of confusion and disagreement filled the chamber. Several representatives requested clarification through their translators. Consider our standard diplomatic process, Tekvar continued. A species faces territorial disputes, resource conflicts, or trade disagreements. They come to the Council. We mediate a solution that typically involves compromises from all parties. The species accepts limitations on their sovereignty in exchange for peaceful resolution. Delegate Cretan raised one of his pseudopods. This system has maintained galactic peace for 3,000 years. Yes, Tekvar agreed. Because every previous species has valued peace more than absolute independence. The humans have inverted this priority system. He activated the holographic display, showing human historical examples. Look at their past behavior. Repeatedly, when faced with the choice between submission to superior force and resistance despite impossible odds, they choose resistance. But surely they understand that resistance is futile against council forces, protested the Vorthak representative. They understand perfectly, but they have concluded that submission is worse than destruction. From their perspective, becoming a client, species subject to council authority is a fate worse than extinction. High Counselor Vexara spoke from her position at the head of the chamber. Ambassador Tekvar, are you suggesting that the humans prefer death to diplomacy? Not to diplomacy in general, Counselor, but to diplomacy that results in external control over their internal affairs. They view our authority as fundamentally illegitimate, regardless of its practical benefits. The implications began to sink in around the chamber. If the humans truly believed that council authority was illegitimate, then every aspect of galactic diplomacy became irrelevant. The Mechanarch Prime Unit processed the information with electronic precision. Analysis. If human position spreads to other species, council authority becomes inoperative. Exactly, Tekvar said. The humans are not just rejecting our jurisdiction over their specific territorial disputes, they are rejecting the concept that any external authority has the right to make binding decisions about their affairs. Delegate Zixathala's crystalline form chimed with distressed harmonics. But without external authority, how can conflicts between species be resolved peacefully? The humans appeared to believe that voluntary cooperation is possible without hierarchical authority. They seem willing to work with individual species on mutually beneficial projects, but they reject any system that claims the right to compel their participation. As the debate continued, Tekvar realized that the Council faced a choice that would define the future of galactic civilization. They could enforce their authority against the humans, proving that resistance to Council jurisdiction would be met with overwhelming force. Or they could allow the human precedent to stand, potentially inspiring other species to declare independence from galactic law. Neither option offered clear advantages. Military action against the humans would be costly, and would set a precedent for using force against species that refuse to accept Council authority. Allowing human independence might encourage other species to reject Council jurisdiction, leading to the collapse of the galactic order. The new reality. The message arrived during the Council's morning session, transmitted on an open frequency that every communication system in the galaxy could receive. It was brief, formal, and delivered in the calm, professional tone that had become familiar to anyone following the human situation. Secretary Mordun read it aloud to the assembled representatives. To the Galactic Council and all interested parties, the Earth Government and Human Colonial Alliance do not recognize the authority of the Galactic Council over human territory, human citizens, or human affairs. We consider the Kepler sector to be legitimately colonized human space, developed through our own resources and efforts. We will continue normal operations in this region and will defend our interests through whatever means prove necessary. Any military action taken against human territory or citizens will be considered an act of war and will be met with appropriate response. We seek peaceful coexistence with all species, but will not accept external control over our internal decisions. This position is final and non-negotiable. The message was signed by every human colonial government, the Earth Leadership Council, and the commanders of the human space fleet. The silence that followed lasted nearly a full minute. Then the great chamber erupted in dozens of different sounds as representatives tried to process what they had just heard. Ambassador Tekvar felt a strange sense of relief mixed with dread. The waiting was over. The humans had finally stated their position clearly, and it was exactly what he had expected after his analysis of their psychology and history. High Counselor Vexara called for order, her ancient voice cutting through the chaos. The human position is clear, she said. They reject our authority entirely and threaten military resistance if we attempt to enforce our jurisdiction. We must now decide how to respond. The debate that followed would be remembered as one of the most important in galactic history. For the first time, the Council faced a crisis that could not be resolved through traditional diplomatic means. Delegate Cretan spoke first, his slug-like form glistening with agitation. We cannot allow this precedent to stand. If humans can simply declare themselves independent of galactic law, every species will demand the same privilege. But consider the cost of enforcement, countered the Depth High representative, his bioluminescent patterns flashing rapidly. Military action against human colonies would require massive resources and could last for years. The Mechanarch Prime unit provided precise calculations. Probability analysis. Military campaign against human resistance requires minimum 40% of Council fleet resources for estimated duration of 6 to 15 standard years. These numbers sobered the A chamber. The Council maintained peace across thousands of systems. Dedicating 40% of their military capacity to a single conflict would leave vast areas vulnerable to other threats. Ambassador Thekvar requested permission to address the Council. Fellow representatives, I have spent considerable time studying human psychology and behavior. I believe we face a choice between 3 possible futures. He activated the holographic display, showing a branching diagram of possible outcomes. First, we can take military action to enforce our authority over human territory. Based on human historical behavior and their current preparations, this will result in extended conflict. We will eventually win, but the cost will be enormous, and we will have established the principle that Council authority depends on military force, rather than mutual consent. Sounds of discomfort greeted this analysis. The Council had always prided itself on peaceful resolution of conflicts. Second, we can accept the human position and allow them to maintain independence from Council authority. This preserves peace, but potentially encourages other species to make similar declarations, possibly leading to the gradual dissolution of galactic unity. And the third option? Asked Councillor Vexara. We can attempt to find a middle path, acknowledge human autonomy over their internal affairs while maintaining Council authority over interspecies disputes and galactic common areas. The chamber buzzed with discussion. This option had not been seriously considered before, but it offered potential advantages. The debate continued for days. Economic specialists calculated the costs of various approaches. Military advisors reviewed strategic implications. Cultural experts analyzed the psychological impact on other species. But as the discussions progressed, a disturbing pattern emerged. Every analysis led back to the same conclusion. The humans had forced the galaxy into a no-win situation. Military action would be costly and would establish dangerous precedents about the use of force in diplomatic disputes. Accepting human independence might encourage other species to reject Council authority. Even the middle path option carried risks, as it might be seen as rewarding defiance. During the 5th day of debate, something unexpected happened. A delegation of minor colonies requested permission to address the Council. Their spokesperson was Governor Lindar of the Epsilon Eridani mining worlds, a collection of small settlements that had never been politically significant. Honorable representatives, Governor Lindar began, the human situation has caused us to examine our own relationship with Council authority. We have concluded that the humans raise valid questions about the nature of galactic governance. The chamber fell silent. This was exactly what Council members had feared. We do not seek to copy human defiance, Lindar continued. But we would like to discuss modifications to Council authority that preserve galactic unity while respecting species autonomy. Over the following days, more delegations requested similar discussions. The Outer Rim territories wanted clarification about resource extraction rights. The Spiral Arm Coalition sought modifications to trade regulations. Even some major species began questioning specific aspects of Council jurisdiction. The human crisis had opened a door that no one had expected. Species that had accepted Council authority for centuries were suddenly asking whether that authority was as necessary or beneficial as they had assumed. Ambassador Thekvar found himself in the unprecedented position of managing multiple simultaneous discussions about the fundamental nature of galactic governance. The humans, by simply refusing to participate in the system, had caused other species to question whether the system worked as well as they had believed. 3 weeks after the human message, High Councillor Vexara called for a final vote on the human situation. The options had been refined through extensive debate. Option 1. Military enforcement of Council authority over human territory. Option 2. Formal recognition of human independence from Council jurisdiction. Option 3. Establishment of a new framework for galactic governance that distinguished between internal species autonomy and interspecies coordination. The vote was close, But option 3 prevailed by a narrow margin. The Council would begin developing a new system of galactic cooperation that respected species independence while maintaining mechanisms for resolving interspecies conflicts. As the results were announced, Ambassador Thekvar realized that the humans had achieved something remarkable. Without negotiating, compromising, or even directly communicating with the Council, they had forced the entire galaxy to reconsider the foundations of galactic civilization. The formal response to the human message was crafted carefully over several more days. It acknowledged human autonomy over their territory while proposing new mechanisms for voluntary cooperation on issues affecting multiple species. The human response to this offer was characteristic of their approach throughout the crisis. Brief, direct, and practical. We accept the principle of voluntary cooperation and reject any system of compulsory jurisdiction. We are willing to participate in discussions about specific issues affecting multiple species, provided such discussions do not presume authority over our internal affairs. We will consider each proposal on its individual merits. And with that, the crisis was over. Not resolved in the traditional sense, but concluded in a way that no one had anticipated. The humans had not negotiated their way to independence. They had simply declared it and prepared to defend it, forcing the galaxy to adapt to their position, rather than attempting to adapt to galactic expectations. As Ambassador Thekvar walked through the crystal corridors of the Council chambers, in the days following the agreement, he reflected on what the humans had taught the galaxy. They had demonstrated that sometimes the most effective negotiation strategy was to refuse to negotiate at all. By making their position clear and non-negotiable, they had forced other parties to decide whether the relationship was important enough to justify accepting human terms. The galaxy had decided that it was. The new framework for galactic cooperation would take years to fully develop and implement. Many species would need time to adjust to the concept of voluntary, rather than compulsory, participation in galactic governance. But the humans had already moved on. Their colonies continued expanding, their trade networks grew, and their society developed along its own chosen path. They participated in galactic discussions when it served their interests and politely declined when it did not. They had achieved exactly what they wanted, the right to determine their own future without external interference. And they had done it without firing a single shot or compromising a single principle.